Hello and welcome to episode 070. It's January 27th, 2024. We've reached another milestone episode. I'm Kodax. Just me again this week. I had hoped maybe Ravenheart would be here, but didn't pan out that way. So I'm going to jump into my purchase that I got last week. I may have talked about it prior, but there's a version of Final Fantasy VII Remake for PlayStation 5 that released a while back around I guess it was around the start of the pandemic, maybe, or 2021, I can't quite remember. But originally it was like a digital release, but they did do a limited physical edition release here in the US. In Europe and Asia, it's much more common. But the print physical version of Final Fantasy VII Remake for PS5 was very low initially. It was only very recently that Square Enix decided to do a reprint. Retailers like Canadian retailer Video Games Plus had it listed, and it's been popping up on Amazon, Best Buy, and elsewhere as well. But last week, out of nowhere, the Square Enix online store listed the game, and they listed it, I think, for only $40, which is cheaper than anywhere else has it listed. And while it was listed there, they, for a very brief, 5 minutes, had a bonus Steelbook offer that came with the game as well. So this is Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. That's what they called the PS5 physical version. And it had the Intergrade Steelbook bundled with it. And this Steelbook was originally only available as a GameStop pre-order bonus for Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. So I had totally missed the Steelbook. I totally missed the physical print run initially because I didn't think that it was going to be some extremely rare valuable item. I mean, this copy of the game was going for over $150. The Steelbook was easily going for over $100. And now I've got both, and it only cost me $50 after tax and shipping. So I'm really glad to add this piece to my collection. So thank you Square Enix for doing that random restock, and thank you Wario64 on X for alerting me to its availability. I jumped in there, it happened to be on my phone at the right time, and I got it, and 5 minutes later it was gone. I tried to tell people about it, but by the time they went to try and get it, it was already gone. I've still been playing Ghost of Tsushima. I don't really have... I'm actually nearing the final few hours of the game before I start the expansion eventually, but I'm not going to talk about it too much today because I do have a meaty episode for you and I want to make sure I get to everything. So I did want to talk about that Nintendo Switch 2 experience event. I entered into the drawing for the Los Angeles portion of the event, and I was just notified yesterday that I was not lucky enough to be randomly selected by the random number generator gods. So I will not be attending the Nintendo Switch 2 experience event. I reached out to a bunch of friends who I know who entered, and none of us got in. So I'm a little shocked. It's probably going to be a pretty exclusive event. So if you happen to be lucky enough to get selected, congratulations. I hope you have a great time. I'm looking forward to hearing about impressions from people. I cannot wait to hear more this April. I did, however, obtain tickets to the Insomniac Games 30th anniversary event, which is this Saturday, so I'll have a whole bunch to say about it next week. We know a little bit more about the event now. There's going to be an itinerary where the doors open at 8:30 in the morning, which is pretty early for an event like this. There will be studio tours staggered every 30 minutes. There will be multiple different panels. You'll only be able to apparently go to one of the panels. There's going to be an area where the devs are just hanging out and mingling with the fans. And then at the end of the day, there's a big signing event. I think it's 2 hours long. And so from what I saw from these tickets, there are only I don't know, it looked like maybe 150 people at most got into this thing. So I think it's going to be pretty intimate. Kind of hope it stays that way. Hopefully they don't invite a bunch of influencers and things like that. But yeah, I'm really grateful to be going, and I'm excited to report back about that next week. Speaking of Insomniac Games, it was announced the day after I picked up these tickets that Insomniac Games founder and president Ted Price will be stepping down from his role and retiring from the games industry. Ted Price has been with the company since its founding over 30 years ago and will be stepping down at the end of March. He made an announcement via I think it was the Sony press blog, and there was also an announcement made on the PlayStation blog as well that was more fan oriented. But I wanted to share the personal message that he posted on the Sony press blog. So there's some of these are just kind of excerpts. I tried to whittle it down for time. We'll see how that goes. It never really goes that well. So last week, I felt comfortable announcing to the Insomniac team that after having been incredibly fortunate to enjoy such a fulfilling career in games, I'll be retiring from the industry at the end of March. Today I'm sharing this news more broadly. I actually made this decision last year. For me, after over 30 years of leading Insomniac, I felt it was simply time to step aside and let others pave the way for our team. During the past year, I had the opportunity to work with senior leadership team at Insomniac to create a succession plan that I know will provide the continuity, stability, and strong leadership necessary to deliver more of what our fans cherish over the next several decades. To conclude this blog, Insomniac has been my life, my home away from home for 3 decades. I want to thank every Insomniac for having a positive and lasting impact on my life. Working side by side with Insomniacs for so many years has been a gift that I'll cherish for the rest of my days. I also want to thank our fans, who for 3 decades have shared their enthusiasm, their encouragement, and their support, inspiring us to take every game farther than the last. We do what we do for you, and I can assure you that we won't be slowing down. Finally, I'm confident that under the combined leadership of Chad, Jen, and Ryan, Insomniac will continue to deliver industry-defining games that players have come to expect from us, while making a positive and lasting impact on people's lives for decades to come. Thank you to Insomniacs, to our players, and to video games for 30 wonderful years. Ted. So as he mentioned in his announcement, 3 people will be taking over his role at Insomniac: Chad Desern, Ryan Schneider, and Jen Huang. Chad Desern has been with Insomniac since 1998 and helped put the finishing touches on Spyro Ripto's Rage, and has been with the company ever since. Ryan Schneider joined Insomniac during the PlayStation 2 era and worked in marketing. Most recently, he has been Insomniac's head of brand and leadership strategy, which in his words means I'm ensuring through communications, coaching, and culture and development that what Insomniac says to the world about itself and our games matches what we believe and how we act inside Insomniac. And lastly, we have Jen Huang, who has been with Insomniac for more than 8 years as their CFO and head of finance. I think it's a great, well-rounded group of individuals who each has their own strengths. We've basically got the creative, the financial, and the cultural arm of the company coming together to ensure that Insomniac remains strong and healthy for another 30 years. It's pretty crazy, though, that it's going to take 3 people to replace what Ted was able to do. Or I guess maybe this is just their way of, maybe doing something that's a little more normal rather than just having one person in charge of everything. Still, the news is a little sad, and it's always a bummer to see the industry lose someone like Ted Price. More than anything, I really hope he's at their 30th anniversary event, because I gotta get my copy of Spyro the Dragon signed before he jets off toward retirement and never looks back. So I make no secret about the fact that I'm a big enjoyer of Hoyoverse's games such as Genshin Impact, Honkai Star Rail, and recently Zenless Zone Zero. So this next story hits a little close to home, I guess you could say. The Federal Trade Commission has announced that Hoyoverse have agreed to a $20 million settlement and will make changes to how purchases are made in their games. Specifically, Genshin Impact is what the FTC initially took issue with here. Samuel Levine, director of the FTC's Bureau of Consumer Protection, says the following: Genshin Impact deceived children, teens, and other players into spending hundreds of dollars on prizes they stood little chance of winning. Companies that deploy these dark pattern tactics will be held accountable if they deceive players. particularly kids and teens, about the true cost of in-game transactions. The $20 million US fine is for the violation of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. Hoyoverse is accused of collecting and storing data of the playing habits, in-game friends list, settings, and spending habits of these minors. Hoyoverse has also agreed to implement the following changes as part of the settlement. Prohibited from allowing children under 16 to purchase loot boxes in their video games without a parent's affirmative express consent. Prohibited from selling loot boxes using virtual currency without providing an option for consumers to purchase them directly with real money. Prohibited from misrepresenting loot box odds, prices, and features. Required to disclose loot box odds and exchange rates for multi-tiered virtual currency. Required to delete any personal information previously collected from children under 13 unless they obtain parental consent to retain such data. Required to comply with the COPPA, that's the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, including its notice and consent requirements. So some of these changes sound a little drastic, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I think these are good changes, but I mean, like, they're gonna have to make some like edits to how things work in their game. It almost sounds like they're gonna need to sell characters directly, or because how it works currently, when you play Genshin Impact, you can, by playing the game, opening chests and doing different quests, you get some of this premium currency that lets you pull for characters. But what if you don't have enough and you want to spend money, right? So how that works is that there's a second premium currency called Genesis Crystals. Genesis Crystals can be used on a variety of things, but they can also be converted to the in-game premium currency that lets you pull for characters. So how you buy this currency is that you buy it in bundles, basically. So you can get some by buying like a $5 monthly pass that gets you a little chunk of crystals, as well as the in-game premium currency. It's all really confusing, and what the FTC is trying to do, I guess, here is force Genshin Impact creator to stop it from being so confusing. Because it's so confusing, it basically, throws a shadow and kind of a mystery over how it all works out, so you don't really realize how much you need to spend in order to maybe get the thing that you want to get. That's why I personally don't recommend spending any money on these games. If you're going to play these games, play them actively, earn enough of the free currency in game that you can pull a character occasionally that you want. But of course, some players have deep pockets or have parents who have a lot of money, or in some cases use their parents' credit cards and things like that without their parents' permission, and then end up getting their parents into debt or themselves into debt. I've heard stories of players spending thousands of dollars and ruining their lives on games like this. So yeah, it's definitely scary. I think there does need to be more restrictions. I'm a little confused why this is like just Genshin Impact though. Like, obviously these changes are for the better. And as much as I enjoy playing these games, it cannot be denied that they are predatory and they do easily extract hundreds of dollars from unwitting players, including children. And all of this still needs to be approved by a federal judge, by the way. But considering that both parties have already agreed to the terms, it seems likely to go through. But regarding, like, not only does Hoyoverse, through Genshin Impact, Zenless Zone Zero, and Honkai Star Rail, have these specific kinds of confusing ways to extract money out of players, it's also games like FIFA, or not FIFA anymore, now it's just called EA Football Club, and other sports games like all those 2K NHL, 2K NBA, and all that kind of stuff. All of those games feature loot boxes, like card packs for like the players, and it's really kind of sad to see how some of these games have just been totally destroyed. It used to be you just bought a game, at least Genshin Impact is a free to play game, right? I don't spend $60, $80 on it and then get sold a bunch of stuff in game. All these sports games that have these loot boxes built into them, those are full premium games when you buy them at first. So I don't know. I think that's really messed up. And I think, the FTC needs to look beyond just Hoyoverse. And I don't know if it's just because they're a Chinese company that they're going hard on them. Technically, Hoyoverse is now based out of Singapore, but the game is still developed in China. So yeah, just a mess. But I do think this is a positive step forward. I would just like to see it applied to all games of a similar sort, not just, whatever the flavor of the month popular one is, I guess. All right, for our last story, which is a big story, because it's more than just a story, it's a whole report that we're going to kind of dig into a little bit here. So, Game Developers Conference, which I'll henceforth refer to as GDC, has released their annual State of the Games Industry report, and there are a lot of interesting statistics to talk about. I've cherry-picked some of the highlights, and we'll go through these together. So first, a couple notes about the report. The report was created with research partners at Omida, and more than 3,000 developers were interviewed. So from these 3,000 developers, this is where all this information is coming from. So keep in mind, it's not going to be perfect sampling, we're going to see some interesting angles and stuff going on here. So according to this report, the age of the industry, the average age of the industry, 36% is within 25 to 34 years old, 33% within 35 to 44 years old, 45 to 54%, 15%, is 45 to 54 year olds, 10% 18 to 24 year olds, 5% 55 to 64, and only 1% of developers are 65 or older. I don't know why it is. I'm shocked that it's the 25 to 34 that's the biggest. I would have thought 35 to 44 would be bigger, and that 45 to 54 would have a larger share. But yeah, I guess it does make sense. 25 to 34, that's when people are out of school, trying to get work. So it's just interesting to see that the industry is pretty young right now. It is definitely a millennial with some Gen Z kind of controlled industry at the moment. Now, as for gender, 66% are men in the industry, 25% are women, and then there was a few different options, which I lumped into one number, 9% for other. So according to the report, women in the industry are growing by 1 to 2 percentage points a year over men. In 2020, men made up 75% of the industry. So it is interesting to see that maybe we're inching closer and closer to a balance like we see with a lot of other industries where it is more 50-50 or, at least a little closer to that 50-50 mark. But yeah, still definitely a man's world, the video game industry. So for job roles, 35% of developers are in game design, 34% are in programming engineering, 31% are in production and team management, 20% are in visual arts, business and finance 19%, narrative and writing 17%, community marketing PR 14%, quality assurance 11%, audio 10%, and there was 9% of not my thing wasn't listed here. Now, obviously, this doesn't add up to 100. Certain people people were able to select multiple roles depending on what they do. It was all that applies. So, according to the report, these numbers are fairly consistent with previous years, though narrative and writing has seen the most growth year over year for the last few years. So that's an interesting point. I guess we're seeing a lean more towards incorporating story and narrative into games, or at least a bigger investment into it. Okay, studio type. This is where things start to get a little interesting and maybe sort of illuminate who these 3,000 people are. So 32% of respondents say they are an indie studio. So in this one, I believe adds up to 100, so you could only pick one. 15% said they were a AAA studio, 10% said they were with a AA studio, 8% said they were freelance, 6% said they were in education, 5% they were a co-development team, meaning like they're like a sort of a team that certain things get shipped off to from different companies to work on, and then they plug it back into the main team's game. Publishing 4%, consulting 3%, marketing and legal 3%, nonprofit 1%, investing 0.4%, recruiting 0.1%, and 2% said prefer not to answer, and others went to 10%. So that's a pretty big chunk of other. The overwhelming majority of those interviewed are indie game developers, or at least people who call themselves as such. But I'm not really sure that's actually representative of the industry as a whole. I'm not sure that 32% of the games industry is indie. That seems a little crazy because, indie teams are often 1 to 5 people, whereas AAA companies will employ well over 3,000 people at a single studio in some case. So I don't know. I'm not sure where GDC found all these people. I don't know if they were their members directly that they asked to participate. But I do think it's kind of interesting that the indie number was so high. So perhaps the reason there are so many indie developers is because of this next point. Layoffs. How have layoffs impacted you or your company? 43% said there were no layoffs at my company. 29% said some of their colleagues were laid off. 18% said other teams at their company were laid off. 11% said I was laid off. 4% said our studio was closed. And 16% said not applicable, which I don't really understand. There either were or weren't layoffs. How can it not apply to you? I mean, I guess maybe 16% of those people are solo devs. That's the only thing that I can really think of there. People who don't have a payroll, who are just working on their game in their free time as they're doing other paid work elsewhere. So how concerned are you about future layoffs? 30% said not at all concerned. Now keep in mind, 33% of these people are working in an indie game studio. So, layoffs are lower there because often they're working for free or for very little money. 24% said they were slightly concerned. 18% said they were very concerned. 16% said they were somewhat concerned. And 12% said other or not applicable. So GDC says 16% of developers who are not working on solo projects were previously employed at studios in the past year, but are now laid off. That's really interesting. Developers were asked why they think layoffs had risen to such heights in the last year, and most of them cited the pandemic hiring spree, rising production costs, declining player interest, and poor leadership and management. Real quick, I just want to jump back over to the laid off people. So we're seeing a trend where either people can't get jobs, so they're making their own solo game now, or they're not interested in working in a big AAA corporate environment and getting laid off again, in a year down the road. Some of these people who have been laid off find a new job, but then a year later they're laid off again. Like they can't get in anywhere. Like they just help finish a project over time and then they get laid off. It's pretty darn brutal. And when you hear about some of these indie success stories like Stardew Valley, you can't help but think, wow, that could be me. Why am I wasting my time making some other person's game? Let's shift over to artificial intelligence. Are generative AI tools used at your company or department? 36% said, I use them. 27% said, no, we have no interest. 16% said, some of my colleagues do. 9% said, no, but we're interested. 7% said, don't know. 5% said, other. So of those that use AI tools, 51% of that 36% we just heard from are in business and finance. 41% are in production leadership. And 39% are in community marketing PR. Again, I guess some of these numbers kind of go all over. So what's interesting here is that the number of actual developers, people who are making the art, people who are designing, the game systems, aren't really using that much AI. Most developers themselves still seem to believe that AI's place in game development itself is negligible, but it has its uses elsewhere in the process. Interestingly, they found the age of older developers were more likely to be using generative AI than younger ones. In 2024, 21% of developers said AI was having a positive effect on the games industry. That sentiment dropped all the way to 13% in 2025. In 2024, 18% of developers said AI was having a negative effect on the games industry. That sentiment jumped all the way up to 30% in 2025. So usage of AI is up significantly, but the sentiment towards it is even more negative. That's interesting, to say the least. So what platforms are you making games for? This is where we also get a really huge piece of news. 80% of developers say they're making their game for PC. 38% say they're making their game for PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Pro. 34% say they're making their game for Xbox Series X and S. 29% say they're making their game for Android, 28% for iOS, 23% for Mac. We're getting pretty low here. 20% are making it for Nintendo Switch. 16% are working on for web browser. I guess web browser games are coming back. VR and AR at 14%. Xbox Game Pass at 13%. I don't really understand why that's separated. 12% for PlayStation or for Linux. 9% for PlayStation Plus. 8% for Nintendo Switch 2. That's really low. That means Nintendo has really not gotten in touch with that many people yet. And tabletop games, so board games, 4%. Again, I believe this is one of those categories where you can select multiple, whatever platforms apply. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. 80% of games being made are coming to PC. Now, given the strong indie bias that we've seen from this report, that makes a lot of sense. It's so easy for developers to publish games on PC compared to any of the other big three console manufacturing platforms such as Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony. You have to jump through a lot of hoops. You have to spend a lot of money to get dev kits and things like that. Whereas PC, you don't even need a really powerful PC to make a game. PC gaming has basically exploded. It really has. These last couple of years, we've seen console games kind of on the outs. Like now console manufacturing companies like Sony and Microsoft are scrambling to put their games on PC. Nintendo, of course, is still, completely restrained and has no interest in doing something like that. But it's curious. It's really interesting that boomers now play on consoles, whereas cool kids and stuff, I guess they're all on PC playing Fortnite and Roblox and Five Nights at Freddy and whatever other Minecraft thing that they like. So let's talk live service. It's been a big topic in the industry this last year as we've seen a number of games flop. Almost all of them, some big, huge, expensive games, just flushed money down the drain. It's crazy. So would you want to make a live service game as your next title? 13% said yes. That's brave. 42% said no. That makes sense to me. 16% said they already do, or they're already working or supporting a live service game that's on the market. And 29% said they don't know if it would be the right choice for them. That's I guess for some people they're just an employee, and they don't really have like a say. But for the people who are like setting out to make projects, I mean, you gotta be kind of crazy. Like you gotta know you're like risking everything. But I guess the payoff is so big if you make a hit from a live service game that it's worth it. So working conditions. GDC reports that more developers are working more than 41 hours a week than prior years. Here are the top 4 reasons why they say they do it, why developers say they work they work overtime effectively. 67% said it's self-pressure. 23% say, I don't consider it excessive. 14% said they have fear of repercussions from their superiors or their employer. 12% said management pressure. So like that's the management actually actively telling you you need to stay late, you need to grind, you need to crunch. So our last thing we're going to talk about, which kind of plays into the working conditions, is where the support for unionization in the games industry at right now. 58% of respondents said working in the games industry should unionize. 10% say they shouldn't. 31% say maybe or they don't know. GDC say these numbers are pretty much unchanged from last year. So which roles are those wanting to unionize? 89% of those in narrative and writing roles want to unionize. That's really high. They probably see like the Writers Guild of America, and they want those kinds of benefits and protections, especially with the advent of AI. 70% of those in quality assurance, aka game testers, they want to unionize, and only 33% of those in business and finance want to unionize. So by studio type, 59% of indies say the games industry should unionize, 60% of AA, and 58% of AAA say they should unionize. So it seems to me that these people have the ability and support to make it happen, but I think the fear of repercussions is too heavy and scares those folks out of making an attempt. We've seen over the last year on a few occasions that those who have successfully unionized have seen the roles eliminated and outsourced. Unionization in the games industry is a whole bag of worms that I am not even remotely qualified to speak on. All I know is that it's really tough working in the games industry, and I do wish those developers better, whether they get that from their employer directly and will recognize them and make things better for them, or if they have to get it themselves through unionization. I just hope that things improve for them and transmission.